We are officially live. We wanted to bring all of our listeners at LAFB kind of a funeral of sorts, Madman, if you will. Colorado officially bolting to the Big 12 for a $31.7 million share from ESPN Fox media deal that was reported today. And we knew UCLA and USC at the top of these things. You know, when they left last year was sort of the beginning of the end for the Pac 12. A small part of me thought they could maybe figure this out if they could retain the likes of an Oregon, a Washington, a Stanford, which they still currently have available. But Colorado leaving after the hype that was built up with Deion Sanders becoming the head coach here, to now we're getting reports that Arizona is currently in negotiations to maybe move to the Big 12. Maybe Arizona State, Utah has some interest from what we're hearing. It really feels like a time to reflect on what went wrong in the Pac-12 and how do we end up here as, you know, people that grew up in Pac-12 areas. I mean, we were joking before we got on air, Madman. You know, you got degrees from about 3 of the schools that I know of, maybe more if we count them up. You know, I went to a Pac-12 school. I grew up following the conference, you know, watching the likes of a Reggie Bush or a Jordan Farmar at UCLA on both the hardwood and the gridiron really do their things and elevate their programs to national status. How are we feeling, you know, about Colorado moving? I know it's not a shock, but I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I mean, we knew that at this point, there was an air of inevitability after USC and UCLA left for a couple of reasons. One is, it came down to media markets, and one of the things that I think was really hurting the Pac-12 is when you take the LA market out of the conference, you just have very small markets. When you talk about Eugene, Oregon, or Corvallis, or Pullman, Washington, or Tempe, Arizona, Tucson, Berkeley, California. These are very small markets that don't have the same reach and traction as some of the bigger cities in California, some of the bigger cities in the Midwest, and then of course, the football crazy South. And so there was always going to be this deficit mindset around what the Pac-12 was going to do moving forward. And Will, I think one of the last straw, I think the fatal flaw at the end was last week at Pac-12 Media Day, when Kliefkoff did not have a media deal ready to announce, that was the end. And, there was only so much these schools were going to be able to wait in solidarity. And you mentioned the $31.7 million from the Big 12. That was reportedly $12 million more than anything the Pac-12 saw in terms of options. There was an option floating around that one of the most credible bids to the Pac-12 was the CW on weeknights. I mean, and I don't know about you, Thriller, but I remember the CW growing up with shows like The Gossip Girl and Dawson's Creek and Gilmore Girls and, stuff like that. I don't really think Pac-12 football when I think CW, so it was pretty dire straits there, Will. And now with Colorado and all the momentum they have with Deion, with the buzz, and, furthermore, just an incredible city that Boulder is and a rabid fan base that they have. I think they saw an opportunity that they, in their words, they kind of they went with the approach of the stability over the instability of the Pac-12. Now, technically it still has to go through tonight. The Big 12 chancellors all unanimously agreed to bring Colorado in. There's still some paperwork and some approval that needs to take place tomorrow, but by all indications, this is done. And now what happens next in the domino? You mentioned it, Will. The four corner schools always made a lot of sense when you talk about Utah, Colorado, Arizona State. And then I think a dark horse here is also Oregon, because as much as we talk about Oregon to the Big Ten, the bottom line is this, Will. Academically, they're not a Big Ten school. I'm sorry to say that. There is a significant gap in terms of academics with Oregon. And so culturally, Oregon, even in terms of kind of their mountain culture up there in the Pacific Northwest, it fits actually a little bit more in the Big 12. They can be top dog in that conference. So I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon is a player as well. I think this is now the beginning of 4 or 5 schools where the Big 12 is going to be targeting. And then I think the dominoes fall with the Mountain West and some options like a Stanford going independent. But we really are here at the end.
Yeah. And I really want to kind of go percentage-wise, 0 to 100% the blame on what this is to happen. I'm going to give you three options on this.
Yeah.
The one that I think stands the test of time is Larry Scott did a horrendous job when it came to running the Pac-12, betting on himself in 2009 and the network to kind of be its own entity. When you look at what the Big Ten network did by pairing with Fox, to at least having them as somebody to kind of shield them with, or the SEC, pairing with the likes of an ESPN. Pac-12 didn't pair with anybody when it came to a network. And you saw that in the subscribers and how they tried to market themselves. I saw that, according to a great article David Wharton from the LA Times put out about a year ago, I went back and did some research. 80 cents per subscriber was the amount he was trying to charge, for different, TV packages to add the Pac-12 network. That is the same price as CNN, USA, and FX, all basic cable shows or networks, if you will, that you can get just off the rip. Pac-12 just didn't have the credibility, and their fight with DirecTV essentially is what caused them to have only 11 million subscribers when the likes of a Big Ten or SEC had 57 and 67 respectively. So Larry Scott deserves a lot of blame. Clevecoff, I know we want to, talk about that he inherited the Pac-12 as a wrecked Porsche, if you will. But guess what? He had the resources to fix the Porsche and get back out on the road. I mean, he's been there since 2021. UCLA and USC did not leave until 2022. So he's had time to figure it out. He has had time to get this deal in place to not make a Colorado leave or to kind of keep the remaining teams in place when it comes to the Pac-12. And the third one that I don't think is being talked about enough. When Texas and Oklahoma left for the SEC, it opened the minds of college football. And I believe USC, who was the first team to leave in the first place, saying, hey, there's broader horizons out there. We can make the effective move in terms of leaving. I always bring this back to our basketball points, right? LeBron James going to the Miami Heat. Kevin Durant does not make that decision unless LeBron makes that decision in the first place. Totally separate decisions. I look at LeBron's decision as the iPhone 1 and Kevin Durant's as like an iPhone 5. It's an updated model. Maybe it was a better situation in the long run.
Decision. Yeah.
But it's the same decision. And it doesn't happen if that doesn't happen. So give me from 0 to 100%. They've got to add up.
Yep.
Larry Scott, Clevecoff, and Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC.
Yeah, well, I would go 70% Scott, to Alfred's point. I'd go 20% Texas OU, and then I'd go 10% Clevecoff.
Wow.
And here's why. And I think the primary person here is Scott, no question about it, because there's three reasons. There's three mistakes that he made, and you alluded to it in 2009 when he doubled down on the Pac-12 network. Number one, he locked in that contract for far too long. That was a decade-long plus contract when the media market and the media landscape was changing. And you always want short-term flexibility. I mean, to your basketball analogy, when you talk about kind of LeBron, what's LeBron sort of famous for is optionality with his contracts being shorter term. He needed to be thinking more in 4 or 5 year horizons. He locked the conference up for over a decade. So the exclusivity was a fatal flaw. Number two was time slots. I mean, this whole notion of Pac-12 after dark, Pac-12 after dark, it was sort of a catchy phrase for us out west, but the fundamental reality was it was just too late on the East Coast and in other parts of the country to watch Pac-12 football. We can talk about bias all we want, and there is a bias. But what was causing the bias? The cause of the bias was the lack of exposure. And when you look at some of the players in the 2010s that didn't get the recognition that they deserve, think about Andrew Luck, think about Christian McCaffrey and Love and all the kind of the Stanford guys. So many great players in the conference in the 2010s did not get the respect that they deserve nationally because of the time slot. So exclusivity was one, time slots was the other. And then the third was the lack of strategic partnership, to your point, where when the Big Ten partnered with Fox, SEC partnered with ESPN, Scott was stuck holding the bag, and he should have known better, because even within Southern California, there was a challenge in terms of making media partnerships. Just think of the Dodgers with Second Spectrum and the challenges that they've had there. So Scott put this in motion, and it really is sort of the culminating factor. Now, Texas OU bolting. I've talked to people in, friends, guys I went to undergrad with, all of this stuff. There was a conversation about USC, why don't they try and go independent for years on the table? I mean, why doesn't USC try to be Notre Dame and just be independent? They are inordinately kind of carrying the conference from a brand and a revenue and an equity perspective. Why don't they try to go independent? But you need something that is going to tip you over. And the Texas OU move opened up the eyes of USC. USC said, look, who's the one school we have to have with us here to kind of keep the rivalry and go? Let's call up UCLA. UCLA obviously very motivated to make a move given the financial situation, $51 million in debt over the previous 3 years. This was a terrific partnership. They went and they made it happen. But Texas and OU needed to be that first domino for USC and UCLA to be that first follower. And so that's where I give it 20%. And then Kleefkoff is 10. Look, I mean, he inherited an absolute mess. I think the challenge, though, with Kleefkoff was the moment he saw kind of Texas OU, and he should have sort of anticipated that was coming and figure out a way to lock up even a 2-year deal, a 3-year deal, buy himself a little bit of time to see who else he could get. But he went with this sort of all or nothing approach. And I think Kleefkoff, in a lot of ways, had a misplaced sense of self-righteousness. I mean, I saw this last year at Pac-12 Media Day. I listened to it again this year. He sort of talked about the high road and, we're kind of getting, out leveraged, outmaneuvered, but we've got things in the works. And it got to the point where his lack of transparency was starting to become dishonesty. And I think he came off so poorly at this Pac-12 Media Day when he didn't have an announcement, and B, he really didn't have any sort of an alternative plan. I think the CUs of the world saw that and said, it's time to go. So 70-20-10. Kleefkoff obviously inherited an absolute mess. He had a chance to move it, albeit a small one, but I think it's 70-20-10.
70-20-10. And as we are speaking, we got the Godfather in the house joining us about the implosion of the Pac-12 news. We've been exchanging text messages all day, shocked the likes of a Colorado, shocked at the rumor of Arizona. Ride or die, I'm going to pose you the same question I just posed our man Madman. Who is to blame? Out of 0 to 100%, they've all got to add up. Is it Larry Scott? Is it George Kleefkoff? Or is it the Texas OU move to the SEC, which eventually makes the Big 12 a lesser entity than what it was?
Great question. Well, what's up, fellas? I was supposed to go for a run after putting Mia down, and I was like, nah, gonna jump on here with the guys. Yeah, I'm trying to get back. I'm running a half marathon in December, so I'm trying to get back into it. But tonight was not the night to do that. All right, we're just getting right into it. I think that we haven't talked a lot about the initial move of Texas and Oklahoma, and I think that was a really big domino that's not getting talked about enough now, because, you had the dissolution of the Big East, whatever it was, a decade or so ago. You had, when that move happened, you had Utah and Colorado join the Pac-12. Outside of that, though, there wasn't a ton of big name schools moving. So I think the Texas OU was like, I remember when it happened, it was like a shocker that it came down. So I feel like that definitely kind of put some stuff in motion. But the answer here is Larry Scott. I mean, absolutely just totally, I want to say destroyed the Pac-12 single-handedly. But I mean, if you can run a conference as poorly as someone can, he did it exponentially worse. I mean, it's just, I would say, I don't know what you guys said before this, but I would say he probably deserves 80% of the blame of where we're at now. And then you could probably do 15% of the rest being Texas and Oklahoma, and then 5% Kleefkoff, who I think was dealt a bad hand, but hasn't done a lot to kind of rectify the hand. I mean, they haven't still got a media deal. He's been there over 2+ years, but it was so bad to clean up. It's kind of like I'm drawing a blank on his name, but the CEO that inherited WeWork, and he's just kind of like treading water, and they're kind of staying afloat, but they still haven't been like profitable yet, but they're still around. That's kind of what Kleefkoff, I think, was kind of given when he took over the Pac-12.
Right, we were close. You went 80-15-5. I was 70-20-10. So we were pretty close there, my man.
That's why we're co-hosts.
Yeah, man. And like, I think I'm with you guys. 70% has got to go to Larry Scott. 15% has got to go to Texas OU. I think that move kind of shaped the future of college football as we know it. But I got to give 15% to Clevecoff. I mean, we've seen him now, right, 2+ years at the Pac-12 Media Day. And I know you missed the morning meeting, but, you know, the statements he made were such without conviction. Like, the longer we wait, the more opportunities we're going to get. And you're saying this, we gave you a year after UCLA and USC left. You have to fix, you know, whatever's going wrong with that. Never really addressed it, still waiting. I know the offers were bad once the LA market left, but it's your job to fix everything. You're the guy in charge. We're all looking at you. It's not a perfect situation by any means. And to see Colorado walk, to see Arizona on the brink of walking, maybe losing Utah now, which would be catastrophic for the football conference moving forward. I just can't leave blameless to Cleveland. Yes, he inherited a horrible situation when it came with Larry Scott. But you also got to step up. It's been 2 years now. We need something more from you, man. If it's not working out, we got to move on. So that's kind of my stance with Cleveland.
Well, you know, the one thing I'll just interject there is, you know, the Pac-12 Media Day, to me, felt like an earnings call of a public company. And everybody was waiting for what Cleveland was going to say, much in the way you wait for the CEO to say, how did the quarter go? How did the year go? How do we do in revenue? What's our operating margin? So on and so forth. And everyone was kind of waiting for Cleveland. This was his opportunity. What an ideal moment it would have been to announce a media deal at Pac-12 Media Day. I mean, it's called Media Day, okay? So there's no better place to sort of make that announcement and stabilize the conference. And when he didn't have that deal, he could have said anything that he wanted. Right away, you could tell that the faith was lost in the teams that sort of claim solidarity. And it's no surprise, Will, that this is coming a few days after Media Day, because the moment you hear that, you then, you know, on a Friday, end of the week, you know, first thing Monday morning, you're starting to make your moves. And this is the first of many domino pieces. So that was kind of the last straw. Everyone kind of gave him until Pac-12 Media Day and said, okay, we're going to give you that much runway and rope. The moment it didn't happen, that was the end.
Yeah, and I mean, we were there a year ago when he said, you know, we're open shopping for business, a statement he later retracted, by the way, and had yet to even add a team to the conference in that time. And Colorado was, you know, they're in a position where they had to give him the Michael Corleone. It's not personal. It's just business at this point.
Yeah,
we got to go to where we're valued, you know, and the Big 12 with Dion, they were able to get that deal pro rata, you know, $31 million. It just makes so much sense. So it's very, very, you know, sad that this is happening, but it does add up if you were paying attention to the dominoes that were falling. I also
look at Alfred Rowe. Look at Alfred Rowe giving it to me over there. Where is Alfred Rowe? I mean, you know, Alfred Rowe's my guy. Shout out to Coach Rowe, and he always gives me this. For the record, I went to USC, UCLA, and Stanford. I did not go to Cal. Alfred loves to throw that one in there to like complete the quad squad of the California schools. But yes, you know, no one sort of has been as closely affiliated with the Pac-12 from an alma mater standpoint as I have. This is definitely a sad day. I mean, I grew up on the Pac-10 and then, you know, Pac-12 from, you know, 2010 onwards. So this is definitely a kind of a sad day, but shout out Coach Rowe.
Hey, it could be the Pac-8 again if they want to just hold pat. Pac-8 again.
It's the Pac-9 right now, you know, and let's see if they can go back to the Pac-8. Yeah. But Rai, I don't think you can have a conference with 9 at this stage. I mean, I think that we're, you know, by the end of the week, we're going to see even more movement here. And I think it really is centered on these 4 corner schools and Oregon, potentially. I think that's the wild card too. I mean, Oregon is having an emergency meeting with their regions tomorrow night. So the moment this Colorado news broke, they're having an emergency meeting tomorrow night. You know that they want to kind of get together and say, hey, what are our options? Call up Phil Knight and say, what can we really do here? There's no way Oregon is just going to sort of stand pat at this point. And I think, you know, we're really on the cusp. I think what's going to be interesting is the schools that maybe don't have the budgets or are not quite as attractive to one of these other power conferences, you know, a la Oregon State, a la Washington State, a la Cal, where do they maybe, I've said for a while now, I think those are folks that are going back to the Mountain West. And I think that there could be a really nice fit there. I think Stanford has always been its own category, frankly. I mean, the reality of the situation is if we're talking nil and money, Stanford's the richest school in America outside of Harvard by far. If Stanford wanted to play the nil game and just dominate football, they could. They're just choosing not to. And so I think that they are in, an independent category. And then I think, between that, the four corner schools, I think that's where it's going to net out. And then it's going to be really interesting to see what Washington does. Oregon's having these meetings. What does Washington do? I think they're all kind of eyeing the Big Ten, but we'll see if the Big Ten's open for business.
Two points I have on that. And I don't know what you guys talked about before I jumped on, so sorry if I'm repetitive, but the smoke about Arizona joining the Big 12, I mean, you would probably know better, Will. You went there, but I would be shocked if Arizona State doesn't at least try to follow suit.
Oh, yeah.
We see these sister or at least same state schools kind of like try to USC, UCLA. So I would be shocked if Arizona State doesn't sell. And then a big tell to me, and Jamal, you made a great point there of some of these small, like Washington States and Cal going to the Mountain West. The fact that, and this is all just me speculating, I have no sources on this, but the fact that San Diego State was really kind of on the fence of joining the Pac-12, decided kind of in the midnight hour, nope, we're staying in the Mountain West, tells me, A, they didn't have confidence in the Pac-12, and B, they knew something maybe, hey, some of these schools are going to end up joining the Mountain West and making our conference better. Why would we leave if there's no stability there? We have stability here, and we'll just bring them here and make our conference better. So that's kind of, I'm seeing some smoke
Ryan,
there.
The San Diego State one is really interesting because you wonder if San Diego State knew something or whether San Diego State kind of just got lucky in how this all shook out a little bit. Because the interesting part with San Diego State and the Mountain West was they were all set to come to the Pac-12, but the Mountain West doubled down, they foot stomped, they dug in their heels and said, if you're going to leave, you're going to be penalized $6.6 million. And so I think San Diego State looked at the books and said, well, if you look at the Pac-12 media deal, and if you sort of assume it's 12 million less than the Big 12, you're in that 19 to 20 million range. We've got operating costs as an athletic department. Now, on top of that, we got to go 6.6 million. They were probably going to be in kind of a mini UCLA situation in terms of debt. And so you wonder if they just weren't willing to pay it. And then as a result of that, the lack of the win that Klefkoff could get by getting San Diego State then led to these series of steps. Or was it the other way around? Did San Diego State kind of know what was coming and then pulled back at the 11th hour? I think it's going to be fascinating in the weeks to come if we sort of unpack what the order of operations here was specifically with San Diego State, because that's just so interesting to me.
Yeah. And, I want to get your guys' opinion on this point too, because when Larry Scott was taking over, he thought he had, essentially money in the bank with USC, who later had sanctions with Pete Carroll, hurting the biggest brand within the conference. And then you had the little mini run with Oregon, and then Chip Kelly leaves. And then from like 2015, outside of that Mariota Heisman year where they compete for national championship, the Pac-12 football was largely dormant compared to the rest of the country. It hurts me to say that as a fan of Pac-12, but we didn't have the main frame team. I think the best, most notable team we had during that reign was probably the Sam Darnold USC team that beat Penn State in the Rose Bowl. That team wasn't even, we saw them run it back the next year. We kind of saw exactly who they were when, push came to shove. So you have that going for you. And then when he breaks down to college basketball, outside of a fun Lonzo Ball year and Dylan Brooks, being a part of Oregon, Dylan Brooks we're talking about here, leading Oregon to a Final Four, there's no really semblance of a Pac-12 basketball giant either. So the conference was really struggling with Larry Scott kind of betting everything on the conference to figure it out with, elite play and the top level brands within the conference to make it work. So it was just a very, very tough time for them. I want to go back and try to, guess, if you will, which teams leave and which teams are headed to which conference. I think this could be a fun little exercise we do.
Oregon, one thing I'll say, absolutely, as you the one thing I'll say about the point that you made about those teams, there's one team that's very underrated in all of this, and one moment. Stanford. Yeah, there was obviously SC being on sanctions. that hurt. That was 2 years. And then there was kind of a 3-4 year aftermath. Oregon got so close, right? I mean, 1 year lost to Auburn, 1 year lost to Ohio State. You wonder, there was a difference of a game there. Like if Oregon kind of closes the deal and wins the national title, does that help the Pac-12 kind of extend their run? If Washington was able to win a game in the playoff the 2 years they were there, was that able to make it happen? I want to go a little bit further back there, right at the cusp of the beginning of the Scott era, is that 08 year with USC, that Mark Sanchez year. And that was when the writing was starting to be on the wall. That was the year that you had Tebow, you had Colt McCoy, you had Sam Bradford. So it was OU, Texas, Florida, USC, and all of them had one loss. And this was sort of a pre-CFP era, and SC didn't get a whiff of any sort of consideration for the national championship game. And so this was coming, Pete Carroll was still there. There was no sanctions. This was still sort of the last great year of the Pete Carroll era. And so the fact that the tides were already turning towards the SEC in 08, where SC no longer was even getting the benefit of the doubt. So 08 to me was a very significant inflection point, because you would think that a team like USC in the 2000s that had done so much in an era where you think about Alabama the last couple of years, when they have one loss and somebody else has one loss, it's a foregone conclusion Alabama's going to get the spot over the others because of a body of work over the last few years, rightfully or wrongfully. The fact that USC didn't get that benefit of doubt in 08, and it went to Texas and OU and Florida, the tide was shifting. And then on top of that, you had the sanctions and the media deal. But that was a pivotal moment where Scott needed to kind of step back, and his predecessor needed to step back and say, whoa, okay, we just kind of lost the benefit of the doubt here. We really need to double down in terms of the media market. 08 to me, I'll always remember that as an inflection point as well.
Yeah, and to kind of build off that, all college sports fans really care about the 80 to 90% of the revenue comes from college football and college basketball. The other niche sports don't really matter as much. And Larry Scott really put an emphasis on that, the other niche sports, if you will, because for all it's worth, the Pac-12 is the best at all those like smaller sports, the volleyballs, the rowing for a lot of the times, just different sports like that. And those have such niche audiences, water polo, if you will, that it doesn't make up the difference between how bad and mediocre the basketball and the football was, which led to an eventual loss. I worked in the famed Pac-12 studios in San Francisco in its last year that they were paying an enormous amount of rent on, losing money each and every year. It feels like I work for Enron at this point, given what's going on right now. But it's a sad day for me, just because even with the likes of UCLA and USC, I thought there was a chance where they could stabilize it just enough. Maybe they would lose Oregon. Like, I thought that was always on the table, which is going to be the next question I'm going to bring to you guys. But like, maybe they can keep it enough where maybe the Arizona schools stay, and Utah is, with Kyle Whittingham is kind of the favorite every year within the conference. Now I just think it's going to be blown to bits, which I think is sad. Madman, you started this off by saying Oregon not academic enough to go to the Big Ten. And while I do agree in terms of the academic standards, money always rules. And like, if you look at the face of sports within the Big Ten, not exactly an academic school in Ohio State. So like, I'm not ruling that out. Money always rules. As long as Phil Knight is devoted to the Oregon Ducks, they will be a competitor and a huge entity to add to any conference. So I'm not ruling that out just yet. Ryan, do you think Oregon makes sense going to the Big Ten, or would you put them in a different conference?
We feel like, Jamal, you and I have talked about this since, when was it announced? 2 years ago that SC and UCLA were leaving. We knew the conference was not going to make, we kind of surprised it's made it this long. Without diving into all the academic stuff, I think Big Ten makes sense. I mean, you look at some of the other stalwarts there outside of the big names. I mean, the Iowas, the Wisconsins, the, schools of Penn States. Like, I don't have in front of me like to compare their academia versus Oregon's academia, but in terms of just athletic and tradition, that Oregon fits, I feel like, with those schools in that regard. And so to me, it makes the most sense that they'd be in the Big Ten. It wouldn't shock me, the Big 12 either. But I feel like it's kind of those two options at this point, Big 12 or Big 10. And in terms of just tradition wise, I feel like Big 10 makes more sense.
And this is a crazy statement, but like I said, money rules the world. Is there a scenario where Phil Knight ponies up the checkbook and goes, I'm an Oregon alum. I want to see them playing the best. We're getting 4- and 5-star recruits every year. I'm willing to fly them out in a first-class private jet to wherever they need to go. SEC. Like, I think it would be crazy for every institution not named Oregon because they have the biggest athletic brand in the world backing them up. Give me your thoughts on if Oregon tried to make the leap that very few schools can make. I'm questioning even Texas and Oklahoma going. If Oregon went to the SEC, that would be something insane. Madman, I'll start with you. Crazy, but I can't completely rule it out.
Yeah, no, and I want to clarify a little bit. I mean, I've said for 2 years, Oregon and Washington to the Big 10, the corner schools to the Big 12, Cal, Washington State, Oregon State to the Mountain West, and Stanford Independent. I mean, that's been my stance. I think the one thing that would halt Oregon to the Big 10 is the academics. I mean, Wisconsin's a much better school than Oregon. Penn State's a much better school than Oregon. So that would be kind of the one thing that would sort of hang it up. But now with Colorado coming back, and kind of reestablishing this whole train of thought, I think Oregon tomorrow as Regents is going to sit down. And I think everything you said, Will and Ryan, I think is going to be on the table. And I think they're going to say, well, look, we've got an opportunity here. Do we dial it up now and pressure the Big 10 to say, take us in Washington? Do we try and be kind of big fish, small pond with with the Big 12 and maybe do some independent media rights things just on our own as one university? Or do we try and go in to the SEC and try and kind of make that happen? The one question I would have with the SEC, to your point, is Phil Knight. Yes, Phil Knight is the most powerful person, arguably, in the history of sports, but he's their only donor. And there will come a point where Phil Knight is no more. And until Phil Knight sort of has said unequivocally, I'm laying out this much money to Oregon in perpetuity, or this is sort of the amount of funding that's going to go, the question is going to be, yeah, you could have Oregon hang with the SEC just in terms of that booster money just off of Phil Knight alone, but for how long? And so I think that's going to be a conversation. They're going to say, well, Phil, what do you want to do? I mean, how strongly do you feel about this? So I think that Oregon is going to play kind of the free agent card, and they're going to say, do we want to bring Washington with us for the Big 10, or do we want to kind of go solo to try and make a play for the SEC? Do we want to go solo for, the Big 12? And then I think Oregon meeting, starts sort of, there's going to be a tremendous domino effect with Oregon that happens even outside of the Pac-12. I mean, there's now a conversation of, hey, if I'm Clemson, if I'm Florida State, if I'm Miami, if the Big 10 is open for business now with Oregon and Washington, the SEC is going to say, hey, we'll load up. Let's take FSU and Miami. So there's a lot that I think, there was a lot of dominoes a couple of years ago and 18 months ago, and then things kind of stabilized. We'll see what the Pac-12 does. Now Jack is out of the box, and you can't put Jack back into the box. So now there's going to be all of these externalities moving forward. I think tomorrow night's meeting with that Oregon meeting and the outcomes is going to be phenomenal in terms of the options, but I think everything's on the table.
And Washington makes so much sense to the Big 10. You preface the academics, the traditions. People forget, man, early 90s Washington football, they were competing for national championships.
Absolutely.
Like a very prominent program. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to hear out Oregon before I turn it over to Ryan, because they did add a likes of a Nebraska, not essentially the great academia school, Rutgers, Maryland, they added these guys, great schools. I don't want to, crap on any of those institutions, but not necessarily like the Northwesterns or the Wisconsins, if you will. So I think there is maybe some mutual interest on both sides for them coming. Ryan, do you think we're crazy for Oregon to lay everything out on the table, even the SEC move, if possible?
No, of course not. I mean, right now, there's no Xing out, crossing out anything with the implosion of the Pac-12. So, I would not be shocked at all. Okay, let me tell you, I'd be surprised if they ended up in the SEC, but I would not be, completely shocked or flabbergasted. How would they fare? It'd be really fun. It'd be interesting to see when you got Oregon and you got Florida, Tallahassee, like this. Like, it'd be interesting to see how that works. But I mean, you also have UCLA and Rutgers, so it's already happening in the Big Ten. So I mean, throw travel out. That doesn't matter anymore, which with the USC and UCLA move, they were the first ones to now pioneer taking out travel out the door and that not being an issue. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I definitely wouldn't rule it out though, to your guys' point. Would it be, I just see them, I don't know, maybe it's just because we see them more up close. I just see them as a better fit in the Big Ten in terms of play style, but it would be fun to see if they can hold their own in the SEC, which we think they can, because I don't think any of us think the SEC is like anything to write home about, which we all
I do too. I mean, Oregon, Washington in the Big Ten makes a lot of sense. And I think Florida State, Miami in the SEC makes a lot of sense, to be very honest, or some combination, Florida State, Miami, Clemson. And I think the schools that we're talking about, there's kind of a very clear where it makes sense. You know, the Four Corner schools, you know, the Mountain West schools, Oregon, Washington, Big Ten. But you never know what the curveball is going to be here in the 11th hour. So let's see what. And I think it was really interesting. The Big Ten kind of said, that, you know, a couple of days ago at their media day, we're not open for business. Well, guess what? They're probably open for business now. So I think it's going to be really interesting how this next 3 to 5 days kind of plays out.
Yeah, Big Ten's not open for business, and Klevkov has got all the deals in the world at his disposal, ready for the Pac-12 right now. I want to pose this question to you guys because this kind of came up to me, and I'm going to start with Ryan this time. All the conference moving and essentially becoming two super conferences, if you will, with the Big Ten and the SEC when it comes to college football. How much of this do you credit the new NIL era? Because essentially with the athletes getting officially paid now, it feels more of a profession, you know, as opposed to a collegiate type of thing. You know, they weren't pros back in the day, but now the star players are getting paid sometimes as much as or more than some of the bench players within the NFL. I mean, you look at the NIL money Bryce Young was getting, you know, Quinn Ewers, what he's making at Texas this year. Do you think the NIL impact and having money officially on the table and then being treated more as employees as opposed to college students has led to the money in college football going to these super conferences, right?
Personally, I don't. I mean, I'm sure it has some bit of a factor, but I think it's less prevalent than maybe it would seem on surface. Because I think a lot of Pac-12 players, maybe it's not as publicized, but they're making good NIL money. You have guys on Chase Griffin on UCLA is the 5th string quarterback, and he's one of the leading NIL earners because he's so smart and business savvy. So I think there's a factor. I think it more just comes down to the Pac-12 absolutely flubbing their media rights deals and the other two conferences absolutely owning theirs, the Big Ten with Fox, SEC, and Big 12 with ESPN. And I think the big turn, not the big turn necessarily, but for years, guys, I mean, we've been saying, not even just on this network, but as fans, like the Pac-12 and the West Coast, there's so much East Coast bias in college football. And everyone we've seen Heismans get taken out of the hands of Pac-12 players because of the bias for the SEC and the Big Ten. And the fact that the Pac-12 and Larry Scott and other powers that be kind of just played this woe is me, oh well, Pac-12 after dark, like didn't say, let's change that. Like, let's change the narrative here and maybe get a better rights deal. Let's put our product in front of the masses. Let's do something different in order to do that. And, you know, part of it, obviously, time zones are different. So there's only so much you can control. But I think just the fact that they did not get aggressive and get creative. And, you know, we talk all the time in this world of journalism specifically, like, are you going to let AI kill your business, or are you going to adapt and embrace AI and have it evolve your business? Well, the Pac-12 just never evolved in all these years. And I think the other two conferences kind of did. They also had the kind of the history on their side in terms of football. So that certainly helped. And being in those smaller towns and just football being live or die, obviously there's factors that play into that. But I wouldn't say the NIL has necessarily only helped those conferences out. I think that just the fact that their commissioners, their fan bases, the way the media covers them, just all of those factors rolled into one kind of is what led to the death of the Pac-12.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, it's so funny you mentioned that. You know, what you just said sounded a lot like my opening monologue. You know, the first few minutes, it was very much on the same page there. Will, it's an interesting question. I agree with Ryan that I don't think nil is a factor. And here's why. I think it's two separate colors of money. I think one sort of flows into the other eventually, but I think the inherent nature of nil, you're talking about a few guys that are making kind of in the millions, and then everybody else is kind of making in the tens of thousands. So yeah, I mean, you're going to sort of look at different deals. It is a factor, but I think the primary factor of what we are seeing here with these super conferences actually has to do with the fragmentation of traditional media. And I think the fact that we are living in a world now, you saw the layoffs at ESPN. You've seen the layoffs, with what's going on with the New York Times and the Athletic. The fragmentation of media has made it now in a way where I can get my media from anywhere. And that democratization of media has kind of created a scenario where the powerful companies, the incumbents, the ESPNs, the Foxes, the ABCs, what have you, ESPN, ABC now merge, of course, but they have to now say, look, how do we consolidate power? In this world where the Will Deckers and the Madmans and the Ryan Dyroots have a network that's just as good as anything we do. So how do we consolidate power? We have to sort of consolidate it through a conglomerate. And so this is sort of what you see in a lot of other industries is consolidation. And so that's what you're seeing here with ESPN and Fox. They are trying to consolidate their power and sort of have an umbrella of so many teams where then they still are able to justify their scale and their impact in a world of fragmented media. So I think this is more about the media landscape than it is necessarily about individual players getting paid $100 grand more on a particular deal. And I think that's the shift moving forward. And I think ESPN and Fox played it really well. And the reality of the situation is, it's kind of a private equity model where you buy a company and you strip it for parts and you keep the parts that you really like and you kind of get rid of everything else. Well, guess what? That's kind of what's happened to the Pac-12, with some of the likes of these other, media companies. Hey, we really like USC and UCLA. We're going to take those parts and we're going to kind of discard everything else because the fact of the matter is, from a brand standpoint, there's not that much value. And so that's really what we're seeing here.
And the last thing I'll say, sorry, Will, is just referring to NIL and whether that helps with recruiting and branding and whatever. This may be the most talented the Pac-12 has been in the last 2 decades. Like when you look at the quarterbacks that are in this conference, the receivers, the edge rushers, it may be the most talented this conference has ever been. I mean, they have to be kicking themselves saying, wow, look at what we have as a product and we don't have any eyeballs to show it to.
It's going to go out with a blaze of glory, right? A blaze of glory this year in 23. Maybe the best year in the history of the conference, and it's going to be the last year in the history of the conference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any parting thoughts on this final, swan song, if you will, for the Pac-12?
Go ahead, Madman.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for everyone here, I mean, I think it's going to be really important to see what the next few days holds. And I think now everybody who has some power and some leverage and resources this is going to turn into kind of the equivalent of NBA free agency now. We're kind of in a free agency period. Oregon's going to have their meetings. The Arizona schools are going to have their meetings. Utah's going to have their meetings. Washington's going to have their meetings. And then keep an eye, depending on what happens with Oregon and Washington. If they do go to the Big Ten, keep an eye out for the SEC. Not just, to Will's point, directly kind of luring in Oregon maybe, but if Oregon and Washington kind of go to their natural fit, which is the Big Ten, keep an eye for Florida State, Clemson, Miami, potentially in an SEC type of situation. So I think that's where we're going to kind of see the dominoes fall across the country. It's going to be a fascinating time over the next couple of days, but this is it. This was the tipping point. You can't have a conference with 9 teams. You can't do it now without San Diego State. SMU's not coming now. This is the end. We're living in history where this conference is coming to a close.
How much does that move the needle too? I mean, San Diego State and SMU, that doesn't do anything for me as a fan of college football. We'll get one more guy in here, Alfred Rowe. We want to get your opinion, Rowe.
I'm sorry to crash your party. I hope y'all don't mind.
Dude, first of all, you are, never a crash. And
you're a part of the party.
It's great to see you, man.
Good to see you. Good to see. I saw it pop up, and I was like, man, it is the death of the Pac-12. So it kind of hurts me too, playing in the original Pac-10. And I just listen. You guys had a lot of good stuff to say, so I just wanted to just give a couple of comments on it. So it's unfortunate, but you guys can continue. I don't mean to stop your flow.
No,
you're doing a great job.
You have the floor,
man. What's your opinion on it?
So you played in the Pac-10.
Yeah, I want to start here. There's no way that the conference can recover because of the region that they're in. So when you look at the schools that you can try to replace with, right? You look at the Cal State schools that have football. So that's San Jose State, San Diego State, Fresno State, right? And we saw Fresno State try to enter at one time when they were good, when Pat Hill was there. And like Jamal said in the past, they've never met the academic standards. So, and I also think that was an issue with San Diego State when they were going to come in. That's the first thing that I said. I was like, they don't meet the academic standards to play in the Pac-12. So I don't think they're going to get in. But I really don't know the issues behind that. And then you got San Jose State. How long can they really compete against even like Washington State and Oregon State, right? They might catch them 2 times out of 10, right? So I don't think that'll be very good. Then you start to work your way over. You got Reno, the New Mexicos of the world, UNLV, Boise State. Huh?
I just said Wolfpack. Yeah.
You got Boise State. You got the Air Force Academy, right? You got all the schools with the fact that the Pac-12 got stuck in a bad region. I can't say stuck in a bad region, but just the region that they're in, there's nobody to replace these schools that are going to leave, right? And so we're looking at a point to where we're going to see the end of a conference that has so much great history. But not only that, we're going to see the end of a great bowl game, right? What are you going to do with the Rose Bowl? The Rose Bowl is a tradition, like, right, Pac-10, Big 12. Like, if you look behind the history of the Rose Bowl and the Rose Parade, it's because people from the Midwest moved out west. They were writing letters back, and they said, you have to come see this. So there was a parade, and it led to a bowl game. Like, so we'll lose that tradition, those types of things. So, I mean, it's unfortunate. It kind of hurts a little bit, right? Because I grew up on the Pac-10, and you know, and I played in the Pac-10, as you guys said, but just it's done. And I think it had. I'm gonna go back to this. I think it died when the Big 12 was ready to bring all their powerful teams over to the Pac-10 at the time and create the very first super conference. And at the midnight hour, Larry Scott never made the deal. And when Larry Scott didn't make the deal, the Big 12 chancellor said no. And the very next day, ESPN offered the Longhorn Network, and the rest was history. If they would have pulled the trigger and made that deal, the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 10 will be catching up to the very first super conference, which was over 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So
I forgot about that.
Man. That's a great point. And to your credit, I think Kleefkoff, when he mentioned, I'm open for business, trying to get people to come into the Pac-12, he was trying to negotiate with a lot of the Big 12 teams, was the rumors, the Baylors, the TCUs. He wanted to bring them into the Pac-12, and when push came to shove and business was there, the Big 12 teams are looking at the contract going, you guys don't even have anything. We at least have this for $32 million right now, so a little too late. It's unfortunate, like you mentioned, Alfred, like it bums me out that the Pac-12 has come down to this, because I grew up in the conference just like you did. I would watch my Saturday mornings of, USC versus Oregon, your UCLA's going into battle for Pac-12 basketball. Like, this is what it was all about. And unfortunately, it's coming to an end. We are going to get out of here. We've been on this live stream for close to 50 minutes.
You got to answer Devin's question.
Devin White.
He's asking you guys specifically.
Yeah, I know a troll job when I see one, Devin White, so I can't even comment on that. But, yeah, post the links of where it was reported that Jarman is leaving. He is very, very content at UCLA. He's a friend of the program. We love having Jarman on. Do not believe that he has any inkling to the USC job, if proven wrong. So
there was a LAFB show saying that would be a great hire for USC.
Yeah,
that's what I was saying.
Right below me too. Yeah.
USC should absolutely call him. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, that's what we're saying. I think SC should absolutely call him. He should actually be at the top of USC's list. But I think, Devin, to your point, I just don't think it makes sense for Martin in terms of what he's trying to do. I think he's trying to build a program and, build an incredible legacy at UCLA. Number one, I think he has the opportunity to build something relatively from scratch. He was kind of the architect from the UCLA standpoint with Chancellor Block for this Big Ten move. I think he wants to see that all the way through. Number two, I just think there's too many skeletons in USC's closet right now. And, we just, everywhere we turn, there's some other issue that's going on. I think Martin his integrity is really at the forefront of his brand. And I think that it would just not make sense from an integrity perspective and just a brand perspective. SC still has more house cleaning to do. Let's at least get, 6 months before the next scandal, and then maybe we can talk, but we're not even quite there yet. And then third, I will say is if Martin Jarman leaves UCLA at some point, that could be 5 years from now, 10 years now, from 15 years from now, I believe it would be for a Big Ten power. And I think that it would be either Michigan or Ohio State. Those would be the two schools that if they came calling. His mentor is, the current AD of Ohio State. If that job opened up, a decade from now, that is the one place where I can see him go, in much the same way you see coaches the last several years talk about, I was a Notre Dame guy. If the Notre Dame job opens up, I'm going to Notre Dame the way Lou Holtz did or the way, some other guys do. So for those three reasons, I'm not worried about whatever, sort of rumor is coming out there. SC absolutely should call him, but I don't think he's going to take it seriously in any way.
Hey, well, I will say this before you close it. I will say this: the Mountain West just got better, though. I'll tell you that much. Because they're now about to no, seriously, they're about to gain Oregon State, they're about to gain Washington State, and if they throw a good offer at Cal and Stanford, they probably just gain Cal and Stanford because Washington and Oregon are out of the conference. They're going to either the Big 12 or the Big 10, right? Arizona State is going to the Big 12. That's any day now, right? Only thing I don't know, maybe Jamal might know this. I don't know if Oregon could leave without Oregon State, because they're both state schools and they're going to have that region issue that they might have. That's the one part I do not know. But Oregon State, Washington State, Cal and Stanford going to the Mountain West just made that conference better.
Yeah, no, for Coach Rowe, it's a great point. And I think that there is a nuance there. I think Oregon has a little bit more wiggle room in the way kind of Cal did. I think Cal and Oregon are kind of equivalents relative to their system. I think it's a great point. Couldn't agree with you more. If that, I don't see Stanford in the Mountain West. I got to be honest with you. I think they are kind of an independent and they can kind of pick their schedule. I'll go play Duke. I'll go play Northwestern. I'll go, I'll have these sort of one-off games. But I think everything else you said, Coach Rowe, makes a lot of sense.
I was thinking that, Ryan. Why doesn't Stanford just go Ivy League?
They're too good for the Ivy League, man. Come on now.
They would spank the Ivy League, though.
Stanford looks at the Mountain West the way James Bond looks at a Honda. He's only driving the Aston Martin. He is not going anywhere else.
What do you got against Hondas? What do you got against
Bro, since I got you here, I have not heard your thoughts on the Bone situation. Arguably, if we're really breaking it down, what he did in a small sample size, whether it was leveraging USC to the Big Ten, bringing in Lincoln Riley, making USC basketball relevant again, he had such an incredible impact and unfortunately got called out due to the allegations, which were totally justified. But give me your thoughts on, the whole Bone situation and what it means for USC.
So the main thing I was looking at, and I kind of watched it, I wanted to see how long it was going to stay in the news cycle. And it only stayed in the news cycle for about a week and a half. There was some stuff that trickled out, but it kind of wasn't front page. It was like third page left bottom corner. The media department did a good job of sweeping it under the rug. And me, Ryan, and Jamal talked about this. I will say this. I think the president did a very good job by getting ahead of it and taking care of it right away, instead of letting the stuff come out by other people and then she has to play cleanup. I think she prevented the issue from happening. Now, what Bohm did, as far as an AD for the athletic department, I think he's done a great job. He's hired Lincoln Riley. He's made the basketball program somewhat relevant, right? He's actually done great renovation. He's doing great renovations to the program facilities. They're getting a lacrosse field. They're getting a soccer field. They're getting a new baseball field. They're getting a new football facility, practice field. He's done a great job. What he was as a supervisor and a coworker was not great. And for you to create a toxic work environment, there's a difference between being hard and creating a toxic work environment. if you're hard, if your boss is hard, you still should be able to go to lunch with him because it's only in the moment. But he's created environments where people didn't even want to talk to him, and that was inappropriate. And it's unfortunate because we just cleared ourselves of a scandal. We finally got back in the media in a good light, and then all of a sudden spring hits, and now we have a whole nother scandal on our hands. The good thing about it is it's kind of gone, right? This is kind of like the scandal. Before I got there, 2 years before I got there, a lot of people don't know this, but USC was in a cheating scandal. They got in a little bit of trouble. It was in a couple of news cycles. It went away. Hopefully, this is kind of like the same way. They bring in a good AD, and SC just keeps their hands clean for a while. So that's kind of what
I think it's a great point. And the one thing I will say is I think SC is really good about kind of mitigating the crisis, and I think
you're used to it.
Given kind of the background with the journalism school and just the media contacts and just how kind of connected SC is kind of with local media, I think they're really good at that. I mean, the other example I give is, Alfred, this obviously, a year and a half ago with the whole fraternity thing, right? I mean, all of that stuff that was going on, that was in the news cycle, national news, about 10 days. That kind of quieted out as well. Things about different degree programs, the councilman, who was, charged with bribery for the School of Social Work. That was in the news cycle a little bit. It kind of calmed, so SC is very good at sort of very media savvy and very good in that regard. I think, Will, to your earlier point, I think it's interesting what Bone's legacy is going to be. And I think Alfred can speak to this much better than I can, but how much of Lincoln Riley was Mike Bone and how much of it was, the boosters, how much of it was Rick Caruso? How much was it Mike Bone? How much was, negotiating, the Big Ten was Mike Bone? How much of it was Brandon Sosna? How much of this was correlation versus causation? And I think that's to me, if he had kind of more to do with kind of the impact at USC, given kind of USC's sort of history, I think he would have actually gotten a little bit more rope than he did. And so the fact that President Folk got out in front of it was amazing and very, very commendable. But there's also kind of a connotation there that maybe he wasn't quite the mastermind behind these moves, because if he was, maybe there's a little bit more rope, especially to Alfred's point of SC's ability to kind of suppress.
Yeah. And I will say this, and you can. This is fact. When you hire a new coach, they hire a firm, and then they say we want this, and this, and then they put it through the firm, and they bring back the names. Lincoln Riley must have been on one of those names. They were very happy with Lincoln Riley coming up as the top pick. And like you said, hey, Mike, we need a couple of dollars to go get Lincoln Riley out of Oklahoma. You know what I mean? Like there's some things that, to your point, Jamal, there's some things that are just like, all right, well, let's make this work. And they were able to make it work. And plus, Lincoln Riley was not happy at Oklahoma, which a lot of people don't know. He was upset that Bob Stoops still had an office there. He was upset that he had no say in Oklahoma moving to the SEC. He was not happy about that. And a lot of people don't know that part too. So when you get a school like SC that has pretty much a big pocketbook and you're in a hotbed of talent, let's try it. You have nothing to lose, right? And it's so far it's working out. So,
and they gave him the keys of the kingdom. Let him do whatever he wants. So.
They did give him the keys of the kingdom.
He's the new AD, basically.
Yeah.
Alfred Rowe, I only got two things from the statements you mentioned: Lincoln Riley ducking the SEC and USC keeping their hands clean for a while, as we'll say.
Alfred is too smart, too astute to say SC is going to keep their hands clean in perpetuity. Let's not talk crazy, okay? We're just asking for 2 quarters here.
A while, yes. A while is 2 years in college time, so we will wait for the next USC scandal the way we wait for the next football season. Much love to all who tuned in. The death of the Pac-12, we had to address it. Gentlemen, it's been very fun. We've got Bruin Bibles coming out this week. We got Salute to Troy's coming out this week. Ryan and Jamal's radio show will be out on the 1090 Mightier ESPN radio show. Any other plugs that I missed, gentlemen, before we sign off for our great listeners on LAFB?
No,
can't wait. I'll be at USC Media Day tomorrow, so excited to bring some stuff there. Yeah.
Can I join? You have another pass?
You can just come say what up. You're like royalty. You played there, right? You can do whatever you want.
I'm not. I wasn't that good though. I just ran out on kickoff. They'll have to go back on the old roster.
Out, ladies and gents.